Next, I want to go to a verse that's used to support the belief in hell, but you tell me whether it supports it or not. Jude 1:7, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So, is eternal fire different than everlasting fire? No, because they use the same Greek word. And notice how this is an example of eternal fire? So the obvious question is Sodom and Gomorrah still burning today? Obviously not. Yet the verse clearly says it's burning in eternal fire, yet it certainly was reduced to pure ash. All pastors do know about this passage, and because they see how it refutes the concept of a literal eternal hell, they claim that the moment the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah died, God warped them to hell so they wouldn't skip a beat. So the reason I had to bring this up is this assumption is a perfect example of scriptural gymnastics, but it's being used to defend the belief of everlasting hell. While this verse is clearly referring to the fact that the fire destroyed these cities and reduced them to ashes. And if you want to understand what happened in these cities, I recommend you watch a video by Rabbi Michael Rood on Sodom and Gomorrah. I'll link it or mirror it on my page. So just to give you a summary, when you compile all the verses on hell, half make it sound like you burn in hell forever, the other half make it sound like you don't. So either the Bible contradicts itself, or we are misunderstanding the context of half the verses. So what we need is to find indications of which is the correct context. We can't just choose which one we like based on preference. I've already shown you some verses which indicate which context is right, but here's a few more. In the following verses, notice what John, who has the most amount of knowledge and detail on this event, keeps referring to it as. Revelation 2:12, he who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. 20 verse 6, blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection, over such the second death has no power. 20 verse 14, then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire, this is the second death. 21 verse 8, but the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. And I have to repeat here once again that God is actually showing these events to John in vision. No other Bible writer got to witness the second death except for John. And after having witnessed it in vision, John uses these words, the second death, to describe it 4 different times. So just like John has way more details on the resurrection of the righteous, he has more details on the second death, or hell. Another major problem with the doctrine of hell is it requires that everyone receives immortality the moment they die, going back 6,000 years. So what does the Bible say about this? 1 Titus 6:15, he who is the blessed and only potentate, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who alone has immortality, dwelling in unapproachable light. If God alone has immortality, we cannot assume everyone else has it. And the belief in hell demands that all the lost are currently in hell right now, and therefore they also have immortality, which clearly contradicts this verse. It also contradicts this verse, which tells us who else puts on immortality and when. 1 Corinthians 15:54. So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. So the righteous put on immortality at the resurrection, but nowhere in the Bible does it say anything about the lost putting on immortality. Do you realize that in order for hell to be literal and real, the lost would not only have to put on immortality as well, but they would need a superior form of it? Why? because according to the doctrine of hell, they will be sustaining mortal wounds all day long, and this immortality would even need to include their nerve endings. See, one of the saving graces of being burnt alive on Earth is that your nerve endings die quickly and stop sending you pain signals. So the pain is horrendous but brief. But people believe that God will be miraculously keeping every single one of these nerve endings functioning every second of every day for eternity. Now, what kind of a God would do that? Now, if hell isn't real, shouldn't this be great news? That God isn't actually like this, nor would he do this to anyone? Every Christian has at least one close friend or family member who has passed away that they are concerned is not going to be in heaven. Therefore, where are they? Well, according to the Bible, they are unconscious and awaiting the resurrection. They aren't currently in hell, nor will they end up going to this version of hell that Christians are taught about. So yes, the evidence swings heavily against what is currently taught about hell. But what about this curious passage in 2 Peter? It seems to indicate that hell exists right now. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. So yes, it sounds like it's saying hell exists right now, but let's look closer. Remember how in Revelation John would compare things from the spiritual realm to things in the physical realm? Peter is doing the same thing here. Look at what the angels are bound in. Chains of darkness? Does that sound like something literal or more likely a metaphor? So God isn't using literal chains, but chains are something that we understand and that they understood 2,000 years ago. So God used chains as a metaphor to help us understand that some angels are confined in some way. And now hell is listed right beside something else that is a metaphor and linked to it, as in hell and the chains of darkness work together metaphorically to confine angels. So little is said here about something that is so curious. But actually, there are more clues in the Bible on this topic. But in the other verses, the Greek words abusos phreer are used, which means bottomless pit or prison. Remember how the legion of demons begged not to be cast into the abyss? So it would seem that Satan's angels can be cast into some sort of penalty box when they misbehave. And remember how in Revelation 12, Satan was trapped to this earth by the firmament? So now we have indication that there is a trap within the trap. And believe it or not, this is something we need to know because we are also warned in prophecy that eventually Satan gets to unlock the penalty box. Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit. And then later in Revelation, we see that the beast or kingdom in the last days rises from the bottomless pit. So now you must be seeing why I insist that the beast is demonic, as in Satan's angels. And then the last mention of the abyss comes during the millennium when Satan is trapped to this earth after the firmament is destroyed. So because the big trap has been destroyed, God resorts to locking him in the little trap. So essentially, Satan gets 1,000 years in the penalty box. And that is all the Bible has to say on this topic. So how is this for a conclusion? The reason the Bible seems to contradict itself so much on hell is because you cannot surface read any of these verses. Ultimately, it's describing something that is beyond our comprehension and offering us metaphorical comparisons so that we can grasp some principles about it and therefore take it extremely serious. You should want to avoid it at all costs. You don't need to add to hell to make it more scary than it already is, as everything described so far should be more than enough for you to want to avoid it. And ultimately, the fear of hell is not going to draw you to God. The only thing that can is God's love. We love Him because He first loved us. And here's one of my favorite verses which explains it so well, and I strongly recommend putting this one to memory. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love.